I'd like to call this Taxpayer Caucus hearing in order. And before we get started, those who can, please rise. And Colonel Ryan, would you please lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, I'd like to thank you all to beautiful downtown Brookville. Those of you who haven't had the pleasure before, it's the birthplace of the four-wheel drive, and you're going to learn about a few other industries that we have around here. But before we get started, I'm State Representative Cris Dush. I represent the 66th District, which covers Jefferson County and the northern half of Indiana County. And I'll start down here to my left with Representative Tallman, have each of them introduce themselves, and we'll get things started.
I'm the senior member, anyways. Will Tallman, I represent parts of Adams and Cumberland counties.
Good afternoon. I am State Representative Judy Ward, and I am from the Altoona area, the 80th District. Great to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Donna Oberlander, and I'm your next door neighbor from Clarion County. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And I'm Frank Ryan from the 101st District in Lebanon County. I'm a retired Marine Colonel. I'm a freshman, although I look like a senior, because I'm brand new to the legislature. And my den mother is what they call us. They're sitting right next to my left. Isn't that great?
Yes, Representative Oberlander is also the caucus secretary, and one of her functions is to actually watch after those of us who come in for the first term. I had the pleasure last year, and she does a remarkable job. The purpose of these hearings is to help the legislature and the people of Pennsylvania understand what the impact is going to be on the Senate's proposal for taxes on the businesses and the industries in Pennsylvania, and what that'll actually do to our homeowners as well as the businesses, and what it'll do to the employment in the Commonwealth. This is the third of those hearings. The first was down in Cumberland County, the second in Representative Ortitai's district down in Bridgeville, and this is the third. What we are doing is the Taxpayer Caucus is a group of members who have been actively working to find a way to pay for the budget that we have passed. It's a responsible budget, but we didn't have the revenues assigned, but we are working on some things that will help to bring those revenues to light. We actually do have some things that they're not going to be necessarily a topic of discussion here, but what we do want to do is, with this testimony, provide information so that everybody can see what this is going to do to our constituents as well as to businesses, and our businesses are constituents as well. And I'd like to lead off today with Terrence Fitzpatrick. He's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. And Terry, if you would, please go ahead and proceed.
Thank you very much, Representative Dush and other representatives. Thanks for the invitation, the excuse to come out and see more of Pennsylvania. Very, very happy to be here from Harrisburg. Also want to thank you and the other members of the caucus for your efforts to look out for the citizens of Pennsylvania, particularly from a taxpayer perspective. I am president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're a trade group comprised of the electric and natural gas utilities operating in the Commonwealth. We do advocacy for them. We also help them in sharing best practices, and we host educational conferences that are attended by members of our companies, out-of-state utilities, members of the PUC, and others. We have serious concerns with the Senate's revenue package that was passed as amended into House Bill 542. As you know, that bill, that fiscal code bill, contained a combination of borrowing and various tax increases as well. The regulated gas and electric utilities are particularly concerned with increases in the utilities gross receipts tax, which were part of that legislation. In fact, 2/3 of the additional tax revenue under that bill, over $400 million, is slated to come from the taxes on the various utilities. Most of that from a new tax on natural gas, some of it from an increase in the existing tax on electricity. You know, and I want to say at the outset, we do understand the difficult fiscal situation that the Commonwealth is in. We recognize the different, I think, perspectives that are out there on that as well. And I think we understand no matter what's done, there's some difficult choices ahead, and we don't mean to minimize that. However, we do object to attempting to solve the problem by raising the price of essential utility services for all the customers in the Commonwealth. As I said, House Bill 542 would apply a gross receipts tax to sales of natural gas. There currently is not a gross receipts tax on natural gas. There had been up until 2000, and then it was removed when customers were given the ability to choose their gas supplier. So it would reimpose that at a rate of 5.7%. It would increase the current gross receipts tax on electricity sales from 5.9% to 6.5%. And just a background fact, a little over half of the citizens of the Commonwealth heat with natural gas. It's about 51%. Virtually everybody has electricity, though, so you know everybody will be affected by the increase in the electric GRT. But the natural gas GRT will fall heavily on that particular group of customers that heats with natural gas, as well as the businesses, as I'll mention. As far as the impact on customers, we've done some looking at this, and of course it depends on the level of usage of the customer. But for a typical residential gas customer, we think the impact would be $5 to $6 per month, so you're looking at $60 to $70 a year perhaps. On the electricity side, the impact could be somewhere around $1 or more per month. So you're talking about a cumulative impact then of maybe, again, depending on the usage, maybe $70 to $80 annual for a residential customer. That's not a dramatic number, perhaps, but I think it is significant, and particularly for the lower income customers who struggle to pay their bills anyway, we believe that that's a significant amount. For bigger customers, of course, the stakes are higher. The Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry has done some surveys of its members and has reported that for a large manufacturer, one particular one, the impact annually would be over $3 million per year that they would pay because of this gross receipts tax, these gross receipts tax increases. We have done some looking ourselves at the potential impact of this on school districts that heat their buildings with natural gas, and that's a lot of heat for a lot of those buildings for the bigger school districts, and we found some impacts over $100,000 for larger school districts, in the tens of thousands of dollars maybe for smaller ones that use natural gas to heat their buildings. So those are just some of the impacts that you could see here. In addition to those impacts and our concern over that, raising revenue through gross receipts tax increases has it creates some distortions that you should know about. Part of that is the fact that you're applying it to some heating fuels but not to others. So it applies to natural gas. It does not apply to heating oil or to propane. So a natural gas customer is really being asked to bear a disproportionate burden of funding the Commonwealth by increasing the tax on them where it does not apply to other heating fuels. Similarly, there are some municipal electric systems within the Commonwealth that they do not pay the tax. So if you're a customer of an investor-owned utility, you pay it. If you happen to be served by one of these municipal electric systems, you don't pay it. So this creates winners and losers because of the way this tax is applied. And I want to say a final word about the gross receipts tax too, something we haven't really discussed before, but there really are some perverse incentives that are inherent in this tax itself. Because it's a tax on the total receipts, all the money the utilities bring in, you know, from their intrastate operations. So as the Commonwealth does things which increase the cost of utility service, either by raising taxes or by imposing more mandates on utilities, it actually increases the tax revenue that comes in. For example, if this gross receipts tax increase were to go into effect, the utilities have the right to collect that on a dollar-for-dollar basis. So the next year when you file your report, that would be more revenue, which is part of the base, and then the tax rate gets applied to that new revenue. So customers kind of pay twice. They pay the tax itself, and then it increases the base on which the tax is applied the next year. And the same thing also happens as a result of other mandates from the state, because in addition to the taxes utilities pay to the state, a lot of the cost of providing service are things that are mandated by the state. Just a couple of examples of that. Electric utilities are mandated under Act 129 of 2008 to provide subsidized energy efficiency programs. The annual cost of those programs is almost $200 million per year, which again, the utilities have a right to collect. So customers pay for those subsidies for that program, and then they pay a tax on the receipts of the utilities to pay for it. Another example are the programs that utilities are mandated to provide to assist low-income customers. The annual cost of those varies per year depending on economic conditions, but I think in the most current year it was close to $400 million per year that we provide. And again, we recover that money from customers. So customers pay for those programs, and then that additional revenue that comes in, they pay the gross receipts tax on that additional cost. So some might say you kind of get the customers coming and going with that type of approach. So those are distortions we just wanted you to be aware of. Now in House Bill 542, there are other taxes, of course, that they're really not my focus, but there's the severance tax on gas production. There's the tax on virtual wholesale transactions at PJM. There's other utility taxes such as telephone and all of those other things. So the cumulative impact of those on customers is something that needs to be considered as well. Again, thanks for the chance to be here, and I'm happy to respond to your questions.
Terry, thanks again for coming out here today. One of the things that I get really concerned about is that when we talk about gross receipts tax or things of that nature, I hear comments in Harrisburg all the time. And for those that don't know, I'm a CPA, and I specialize in keeping companies out of bankruptcy. And I hear people in Harrisburg make comments that $5 a month, $6 a month, it's not that big of a deal. But I'm seeing that right now, 2/3 of all Pennsylvanians are within one paycheck of being insolvent and unable to pay their bills. Is that your experience with the $400 million that you're finding your association has to set aside to help people who need income assistance? Are you seeing an increase in the number of people who are applying for assistance because of the problems associated with their costs going up so much?
It tends to vary depending on economic conditions, Representative. In some ways, it's thank goodness for our energy revolution in the state with the Marcellus, which has reduced the cost of energy dramatically. So utilities have been putting more money into their infrastructure, the wires, the pipes, and that causes an increase in the bills, but it's been more than offset, frankly, by those supply prices. So, but then the economy affects it too, and that has actually tended to increase the amount of aid because, people having difficulty just making ends meet. So the amount goes up and down that we have to pay for those, but currently, as I said, it's close to $400 million per year.
Has that number been going up over the past couple of years? It's been pretty steady, the $400 million?
It has gone up somewhat recently because of the economy, yes.
And on the severance tax.
And I want to say, too, one of the things I just want you to be aware, it's kind of a constant push and pull with the utilities, with the PUC, with some of the low-income advocacy groups, because, of course, they're constantly trying to increase the funding for that. And we try to make the point of view, we're sort of stuck in the middle on that, but we say, well, okay, we understand the need, but understand the needs of the customers who are paying for that too. That's something you can't lose sight of.
If a severance tax were put in, and for those, I'm opposed, I think most of the people here are opposed to a severance tax. If a severance tax were put in, would that end up getting passed on to the consumer in your mind?
I can't say on a dollar for dollar basis it does, but I think just as a matter of simple economics, whenever you increase the cost of producing a good or service, you're putting upward pressure on the price. I've heard various people who study that more than me. Bob might have a perspective on that, but it certainly puts upward pressure on prices when you're increasing the cost of the producers.
And one last comment / question. You know, I personally believe in the personal property rights that we have. That's how we're different than Europeans. And the natural gas that happens to be under somebody's property, I'm hearing more and more people in Harrisburg give the impression that that belongs to the state and not belong to anybody else. And I have a major problem with that. When someone's assessing my property for value, it belongs to me. When somebody's extracting it from my property, they're saying it belongs to the state. This idea of the personal liberty associated with owning your own personal property, and it's the reason I'm a supporter of House Bill 76 and Senate Bill 76, is that we have to get the state on a spending diet. In any of the businesses that are here that run into financial trouble, if we need to, we cut back our expenditures. Homeowners or renters cut back on expenditures when they don't have it. The state is probably one of the few areas I've seen where it's, I need more money, I want more money, give it to us. I'm just concerned that the business climate in the Commonwealth. So my question for you is this. Are you seeing a deterioration in the business climate in the Commonwealth because of the way we choose to tax?
I think there are a number of things going on that have made the business environment challenging. I do think the regulatory and political environment is always a concern. And certainly this legislation, because of the additional costs that it would put on businesses and really the biggest asset probably this Commonwealth has had going for it the last decade has been, as I said before, you know, that abundant, new, relatively inexpensive energy from the Marcellus Shale. This is putting a tax on people who produce it and people who use it as well. So we're kind of taken action against our greatest strength, I would say. So we're part of the coalition, as you know, I think, with the Chamber of Business and Industry, the Manufacturers Association opposing this, and that's a point that we're all raising.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Tallman? All right.
They're related.
I will ask one or two here.
Sure.
Terry, one of the things that concerned me in the language of the bill, it actually says that the electric companies are exempt in a manner of speaking, but the language to me kind of leaves it open for interpretation on the part of the bureaucrats at the Department of Revenue. Do you have any information on that as to whether or not that's rock solid? Does the industry believe that the language is rock solid? Because my concern is, if you're filing, if the gas company is paying a gross receipts tax, and then the sales tax is computed on top of the providing the product plus the gross receipts tax, and then if the utilities have to start charging or are billed for the gross receipts tax as well, and then adding a gross receipts tax on top of all of those taxes, and then a sales tax, you're looking at a tax on a tax on a tax on a tax. And then the telecommunications also subject to a gross receipts increase. That would be a fifth tax layered on top yet with the following sales tax. So are you comfortable with the language in that bill? Do you think it's solid as far as preventing the electric companies from having to provide that?
I think that this pyramiding of the tax, which is what you were describing in general as a concern with gross receipts taxes. I think let me ask a clarifying question, Representative. Are you referring to, I think there's an exemption written in the bill for electric generators.
Yes.
So that, okay. I don't have any expertise on that, just other than seeing the language that was in the bill. We haven't really had much discussion of that. I mean, the language on its face seems clear to me that those sales are cut out of our gross receipts that we would include that the tax is applied to. That's what appears to me from the language of the bill. I don't have any insight other than that, frankly.
All right. And my second question, I have a significant number of people in my district that are on LIHEAP. It's a means, a grant to help pay for their heating because of their incomes being so low. For those who aren't aware, I know
From
Terry,
federal,
you are.
yeah, it's federally funded from your taxes, from your federal taxes, frankly, yes.
Yes. This bill specifically identifies the fact that that's going to have a negative impact on those folks and increasing the dollar amount, another $20 million that they recognize. But that's for the people who are already eligible. The people who are right there on that borderline, and I have a lot of them that don't qualify, but they're right there at the edge of that. That extra $70-some a year, and that's just what we can see up front. That's not including some of the other follow-on costs that they're going to be seeing. With your customers that your association provides to, how much of an impact do you think that's going to be for those people who are right there on the edge?
Well, and people who are on the edge, anything you do tends to make it certainly more challenging for them. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, though, because the bill does earmark of the additional tax on gas, the money that's going to come in. They're taking $20 million and putting it towards LIHEAP. From the low-income customer perspective, there are some benefits to that. But at the same time, as a gas customer, LIHEAP doesn't just go to gas customers. LIHEAP goes to customers of these other fuels. So gas customers are now going to be funding an assistance program that provides assistance to heating oil customers who aren't contributing to that. So I think it just gives me another opening to talk about the distortions that apply here, because this tax is being applied to some fuels but not to others.
Thank you. That's actually something that I hadn't been aware of, and that's exactly why we're holding these hearings.
Okay.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks.
Bob, you want to introduce yourself, and please proceed.
Thank you. My name's Bob Beatty. I'm a local businessman. I've been a Pennsylvania resident all my life, but I'm here, I guess, wearing several hats today. I'm with the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association. Pardon? Oh, sure. I'm a board member of the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association, and I also chair our Pipeline Marketing and Development Committee, which is trying to connect producers to end users and take advantage in a responsible way of this resource we have. Along with that, I'm on the board of Pittsburgh Region Clean Cities, which, if you look at the Clean Cities mission, we're funded in part by the Department of Energy. It's to encourage the responsible use of all forms of energy and develop those resources without hindering the environment. So I say that because a lot of that overlaps, believe it or not. But in my capacity, being in the gas business, I own natural gas wells, so I'm a small producer. I also build and design alternative fueling stations for CNG, LNG, and gas to liquids for myself and for other people. So I'm involved in what I call alternative uses for our indigenous resource that we have. We can drill a lot of wells, and when you look at how we judge this industry, most people judge it by the rig count. How many rigs are in Pennsylvania drilling a hole in the ground today? I judge it by what are we going to do with this resource after all the rigs are gone? Because most of those people come from other states, drill the wells, frack the wells, and then go home. And what are we going to do on a long-term basis? So just to back up a little bit, I'm not here to complain or whine about paying taxes. I consider myself privileged, number one, to work in a state and have the freedom to be an entrepreneur. So we have a lot of blessings in this state. So as far as fair taxes and equitable distribution of them, I think that's a great idea. It's a necessary thing. After all, energy is basically what separates us from the animals when you look at it. Without energy, we wouldn't have civilization. Without energy, we wouldn't have a lot of the things that we take for granted. And I look at, recently we provided a letter and testimony a couple weeks ago. The city of Pittsburgh The mayor specifically said he wanted to divest the pension program of the city and county of all fossil fuel related investments. So I thought about that for a moment. And let's just think about what we have underneath our feet and how that resource translates into everything we use every day. Cosmetics, soaps, cleansing cream, toothpaste, shampoo, hairspray, lotions, plastics used in everything from sporting equipment to cell phones to pill bottles in the pharmaceutical industry, communications equipment. In fact, medicines themselves, not just the containers they come from, synthetic fabrics, rayon, nylon, polyester, synthetic rubber, carbon black used in paints, inks, batteries, televisions, and computers. And then we use wax to make candy and gum and other things that we don't even think about. So if you're going to divest yourself of petroleum products, are we all prepared to be like the Amish and have no electricity and no cars and sit in the dark at night and talk to each other instead of watching TV or whatever else we like to do? So that was a little distraction from the point, but I don't think none of us stop and consider on a daily basis what we actually have at our disposal. This newfound Marcellus and Utica, it's not newfound, we've known it's been there, we just found out a way to extract it from the ground safely and take advantage of it. But it's a precarious industry. It's in its infancy, it's very fragile right now. And with all the taxes and all the legislation and all the daily hurdles that occur now, we can't afford to stack something else on top of it. I just look as a small gas producer. A lot of people get the impression of, oh, the big oil companies are in control of all the natural gas in Pennsylvania. For the most part, that's not true. There are 5 or 6 large corporations that own some of the deep resources. But as a Pyoga board member, I interact with producers every day, like myself, who own 30 gas wells or own 50 or 100 gas wells. And they're people that have been part of this community and part of this state for decades. Some of these small production companies are on their 3rd and their 4th generation of working and supplying jobs in our communities. And when you take into consideration all of those things, about 61%, and people will argue statistics all day long, whether they get them from the DEP or they get them from the Department of Health or where they come from, but let's just say over 60% of our natural gas still comes from those shallow, conventional, small producers. A good example is Punxsutawney in Brookville. I own a fuel station in Punxsutawney, and the natural gas that's supplied into the pipeline that runs through and around Punxsutawney comes from the majority of shallow local producers. And it's precarious right now. In the winter, there are times when Punxsutawney is in danger of running out of gas on a daily basis because there isn't enough of the resource. Just because it's underground, just because it's here, doesn't mean there's the needed infrastructure to fully utilize it. So the point I'm making here overall is we need to do things to encourage this industry. We need to help foster it along, maintain the jobs we have while creating more jobs in the industry, and that's where your tax base is going to come from, by employing people long term. I look at the typical producer right now. If you look at that severance tax proposal, whether we base it on NYMEX or Henry Hub, there isn't anybody in this county getting NYMEX or Henry Hub for their natural gas price. The producer is about 7 to 10 steps removed from the retail price of natural gas. We're lucky to get $1, $1.25 an MCF as a small producer, not the $3 or $4 you see on the daily prices. And if you're going to look at a gross receipts tax, and I realize I'm speaking to a friendly audience here for the most part, so I'm preaching to the choir, but I got to scratch my head and ask the question, well, why don't we put a tax on kitchen cabinets? It's a gross receipts tax. That'd be my question for the governor. I know why, because you can't afford it. So if you look at natural gas, and for every dollar per MCF that's made by the producer, he's paying the landowner 12.5 to 15% of that. So that comes right off the top. Then he's paying for the brine disposal and the maintenance of the well and the well tenders, the income taxes, the property taxes on those minerals. Someone brought the point out earlier, I think you did, Frank, that you know, that you pay taxes on those minerals when they're in the ground as the landowner. So to take an impact fee or a severance tax and impose it on top of the taxes that are already paid, we're compounding taxes and targeting one specific industry for the sins of everybody. And what I find really disturbing about that is no one stopped to consider what happens to the small producer that goes out of business. And I get to interact with people from DEP and Department of Revenue, and I'm not picking on any of them. Most of them are good people, well-intended. But if you look at the average shallow well or marginal well, as the U.S. database maintains a stripper well, they call it a marginally producing well. In Pennsylvania, we have over 61,000 of those. As a small producer, I'm required to maintain a bond for my company should I fail to perform and maintain my gas wells. My bond is $25,000 on a dozen gas wells. If I'm somebody who owns 500 gas wells, I have a $25,000 bond at stake. So if it becomes difficult or impossible to maintain those wells, what's to stop a producer from throwing his arms in the air and saying, keep my $25,000 bond, I can't do this anymore? If that happens, and it's already happening, as Pyoga, we've seen our membership drop from 1,000 members to under 500 members in the last 2 years. People are being absorbed or going out of business or going somewhere else to do business. And it's a concern. No one wants to see gas wells abandoned and the problems that we could see, potentially see, come to play. But if you look at that $25,000 that's at risk, if those wells become abandoned and they're no longer used, I call it the 3 E's. You're going to have an energy crisis, an economic crisis, and an environmental crisis stacked on top of one another. The energy crisis is going to come in the form of we don't have enough gas being put into the local pipelines now to handle our energy needs of our surrounding communities. So if several or dozens or hundreds of shallow wells disappear from that stream, we're going to have an energy crisis almost immediately in the colder months. The economic crisis that's going to follow is we're going to have some of the 41,000 people that are employed in the conventional gas industry in Pennsylvania are going to lose their jobs. Already companies are losing jobs and cutting back on the people that they employ or the number of hours. The third crisis that's going to come is the environmental problem that we're going to create. If I or another producer simply says, keep my $25,000 bond money, you take care of the problem. And I'm not promoting that idea, but in reality, that's what's going to happen. If you can't make it every day in business, you're going to fold up, take your tent, and go somewhere else. Someone else is going to be left to deal with the problem. In this case, it's DEP. DEP does not have enough money in the orphan well program or abandoned well program to even begin plugging gas wells that need plugged. So where's that burden going to fall? If they keep the bond money won't pay for it. DEP can't handle it. They're going to have to increase the burden on the taxpayer to take care of the problem that's being created by being discriminatory and unfair to one industry. And that's something that nobody's considered in all of this. If you look 2 or 3 or 5 years down the road, the little bit of tax money you might collect now by an impact fee or a severance tax or a gross receipts tax isn't going to come anywhere near mitigating the future problems that you're going to create. And when I say you, I'm speaking collectively. I know it's not anybody at the panel. But I look at, we already have some inequities in this industry. As an alternative fuel promoter, CNG and LNG, I've looked at, and I've been in discussions with people from other states and other countries, and I hosted a forum a year ago where foreign journalists came to Brookville to see a natural gas refueling station and wanted to know about it. And the biggest puzzlement to them was, why doesn't your country mandate the use of alternative energy? If this were India or Pakistan or someplace else and we had this abundant form of energy, everybody would drive a natural gas car. I said, well, it doesn't work that way here, but there are a lot of hurdles that come up every day. One of the big hurdles is there's inequities in the fuel tax already. And when you talk to the people at Revenue, they say, well, we're dealt the hand that we have to play. The law was passed, we have to enforce it. And I'll give you an example. Fuel is taxed for vehicles by the BTU content. It's not taxed by the dollar value. So as an extreme example, if diesel fuel were $4 a gallon, or gasoline were $4 a gallon, and CNG were $1 a gallon, I would still pay the same tax per gallon as that other fuel. If you go out on the boulevard today at $2.30 a gallon for CNG, over a third of that price is state and federal taxes. Where if the gasoline and the diesel fuel are taxed at a similar rate by the BTU content, not the retail price. So it's not like a sales tax. It's already a gross receipts tax in one form or another. Then you pay sales tax on the natural gas, you pay sales tax on the electricity, and now we're going to stack a gross receipts tax on top of that, or a severance tax on the producer of that natural gas, which means we're going to stifle and snuff out an alternative industry that has so many benefits that I could talk for 2 hours on the benefits of the alternative fuel industry outside of this forum. And we're going to kill it before it gets off the ground. So, and I listened to all your other testimonies. You had the one in Bridgeville, and I'm trying not to repeat anything that was already stated, and Terry did a good job of using some of the statistics I was going to use, so I'm shifting my focus a little bit on what the impact will be of not making the right decision now. You look down the road of what the burden is that we're going to leave on our children and our grandchildren. It's going to be an impossible hill to climb. And I look at the projects we have teed up in western Pennsylvania. I manage 6 fueling stations. I've built a dozen or more for other people. And we have projects that are designed to take advantage of the local natural gas supply we have and put people to work. Cris is aware of some of the projects we're working on. We've started an industrial park in southern Jefferson County that if the first 4 projects are successful and they will use natural gas, it's going to create close to 200 well-paying jobs in the first 2 years. That's going to do far more than a couple pennies per MCF on a severance tax or a gross receipts tax. The industry is just precariously balanced right now. Everyone is under the impression from the media that gas producers are making windfall profits hand over foot. That's just not the case. They're one step in the process of 7 or 8 steps. After that gas leaves the wellhead, it goes into a gathering line. Somebody has to maintain those gathering lines. It goes into a production line. Somewhere along the way, or maybe even 2 steps along the way, a gas marketer gets his cut or her cut on that. Then it goes to produce electricity. Then it goes to produce manufacturing. Every manufacturing business that depends on natural gas for some step of its business is going to have an increased cost. So every product. And if you look at how that relates to a large vertically integrated business, if you're a large mega company that, if you were in the cabinet business, for example, if you grew your own trees, you harvested your own trees, you cut and planed your own lumber, and you made your own stains and oils, and you were vertically integrated in every aspect of that business, you'd pay this tax one time. But if you're a small business that gets your natural gas from somebody else, gets your electricity from somebody else, and you get some of your raw materials like the steel or the plastic from somebody else who has to use natural gas or electricity for that, now you're compounding tax upon tax on every aspect of that business. And when we look at the gross national product of the United States, it's not those 4 or 5 mega companies that do business that create most of the jobs and most of the economic growth. A large percentage, somewhere near 80% of our gross domestic product comes from small businesses. And they're the ones from the business side that are going to be impacted the worst. When that happens, the consumers are going to bear the brunt of all this. So that's, I could talk for a long time about this, but I think I'm going to take questions and I can answer those questions individually.
Thanks, Bob. Representative Tallman?
Thank you, Chris. I have a couple questions that some of them are, both of you may be able to answer. First one, by the way, thank you for being here. First one's for Terry.
Sure.
And your organization has come out opposed to the tax package that was done by the Senate. And some of us, Colonel, I call him Colonel, sometimes I accidentally call him General. Colonel Ryan and Chris and I have been in Harrisburg 4 or 5 weeks now. I call us the budget hawks. And so it's no surprise that us here at the table are opposed to the whole concept of the borrowing and taxation that the Senate has come forth. And so some of us were tasked with different things. And I was tasked to reach out to a couple of the utility companies because we want to get a broad-based opposition to the Senate's idea. And I contacted some. I have 2 large utility companies in my, electric utilities in my district. Interestingly enough, they say the association has expressed their opposition, but we're going to remain neutral. These 2 utilities cover a big chunk of Pennsylvania. I need them to be in opposition to what the Senate has done. How can we make that happen, Terry?
Well, as an association president, one of the challenges I have, and Bob's probably seen some of this, is trying to keep the members in the fold, try to get everybody pointed in the same direction. But, you know, individual companies have their own business interests, and, you know, I answer to them, they don't answer to me. So, you know, I'm on the taking end of that. And, you know, it depends on their business plans, what else they have going on. I can tell you this, and I don't want to talk about individual members where they're coming from. They can tell you that themselves, Representative. But certainly we have governance procedures, so I can't say I'm opposed unless I have a strong majority of our members that are opposed. So that's where we're coming from as a group. But as to individual members, they, you know, can do their own thing. The other thing I want to say, too, is that as regulated utilities, it's not a comfortable position for us to be in, to be here opposing something like this, because we understand the politics of it. Frankly, there's people who voted for that in the Senate who we think are reasonable legislators that we usually work with, and we find ourselves opposed to them now. And it's not a comfortable position, particularly for regulated utilities, which, you know, are so intertwined with the government in ways which I tried to explain here. But we're here, and we're opposed to it and making our perspective heard.
Okay, we just could use some of that support. I think Representative Ryan kind of asked this question, but basically, and I'm going to use this phrase, you're going to tax me when I come through the door, and you're also going to tax me when I go out the door. So we have a severance tax, and then we have the gross receipts tax. So if I'm heating my house and everything else using natural gas, I'm going to get double whammied. Is that not true?
At a minimum. You're lucky if you're only going to see it in the beginning and the end and not 2 or 3 steps in the middle, the way this is unfolding.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Then one more technical question, then a broad question for both of you. We have spent a lot of time in Harrisburg talking about shallow wells, and new buddy back here, and I do want to come out and see a shallow well operation. But we talk about depth, and I can't tell you, what'd you say it was, Devonian? How far down's that?
Say down to 4,000.
4,000. Because that's kind of how we define what's going to be the deep extraction versus the shallow wells. And taxation and Title 78, which we're changing, is also impacted by those same things. So what happens with Utica? And do we have any Utica in being extracted in Pennsylvania?
In the past, there's been Utica development. Yeah, it's not such a hot play today, but say back in the 80s, there was Utica development.
I was going to ask Eric to come up if he wanted to, and no, it's okay. Just for the benefit of the people who are watching, what Eric was describing is that the shallow wells can go somewhere as deep as 8,000 feet, and 4,000 feet. And we do, in western Pennsylvania, actually have some Utica wells that have been tapped.
So,
If I might comment on that too, methane's methane, whether it comes off of a coal bed, whether it comes out of the Utica, the Marcellus, the Speechley, any of the shallow or the deep formations. If you're going to tax methane, what I see happening is this is a foot in the door that, okay, we're going to tax this formation extra, or discriminate against one formation now because we believe it's a windfall. But we've already seen all the inequities that were brought up today. It's just a foot in the door to go further and go after everybody for this particular resource. And if I'm a landowner and I'm paying the property taxes, and all of a sudden now my check gets smaller from the gas company because there's a severance tax attached to it on top of the income tax and on top of the property taxes and on top of all the other taxes, the logistical nightmare of all that. Who's going to keep track of, from well A, this many molecules came and went into this pipeline, and oh, by the way, some of them from over here were from a deep well, and these ones were from a shallow well, and how many molecules went to the electric company, which is under this exemption, and how many went to somebody's barbecue grill? Who's going to keep track of that? It's almost like the Pelosi version of, healthcare. Let's pass this bill and tax everybody, and we'll leave it up to revenue to figure out how we're going to do it.
okay, my last question for both of you, and we have more and more of our electricity being produced by natural gas, a very large natural gas generating plant in Adams County. So the economic impact across the sector, we're doing the cracker plant in Beaver County. If we would enact just the whole, what's in 542, the whole tax gamut, what would you guys see the impact, economic impact on the Commonwealth?
I think, Representative, honestly, at the Energy Association, we've tended to focus on what impacts us. I mean, I've seen broader, I know the Commonwealth Foundation has testified a couple times, and they've broken it down. I think it was $180 per citizen. They had some economic analysis done. We haven't done that, so I couldn't, beyond the things that we've said about how this snowballs a tax on a tax, I don't have any insight beyond that. Certainly the severance tax, I would think, would have some impact on electric generators. To the extent you're increasing the price of their feedstock, you're making it more challenging for them economically.
I have a business partner that lives in Nashville, and we compare notes all the time because he wants me to come to Nashville and do what I do up here. We lose some 35 families a day in Pennsylvania. Our greatest natural resource that we export is our young talent. We raise our children, they get a good education, and they move out of state to find a better paying job. We're losing 35 families a day because of that. Nashville is gaining over 25 families a day because of their incentives and their attraction to business and workforce. Now, that's one city in another state. If we continue that trend, which this is just going to help to perpetuate, the results are going to be immeasurable. Immediately, yeah, it sounds like a short-term fix. And I compare this to some of the P3 projects that have been done in the past, the public-private partnerships. And I have to scratch my head on some of those as well. It's you promote alternative energy and you encourage entrepreneurs to do it, and then the state decides they're going to get in the business of promoting natural gas and selling it themselves at bus garages and open them to the public. Well, it's a free country. You enjoy healthy competition, but the state can't have it both ways. They can't get in your backyard and do what you do and then want to tax you and have you pay taxes that they're not subject to. That's just one example. But if we look at the P3 projects as a whole, you know, the city of Chicago I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago decided that their parking garages were in such disrepair they couldn't afford to maintain them anymore. So they sold their parking garages and all their public parking lots in meters to Merrill Lynch, only to find out several years later that that was a one-time windfall. We got that revenue for those buildings. Now we've given up that income. And I use that comparison because I'm asked on a daily basis. 3 years ago, I built almost 16 or 17 fuel stations in Pennsylvania. Most of my work next year in 2018, 19 is Florida, Wisconsin, New England, Ohio. I have one fuel station to build this year in Western Pennsylvania, and the rest are out of state. I got to follow the work wherever that work leads me. I'd much rather it kept me in Pennsylvania. But back to the P3 for a moment. Chicago found that when they had their St. Patrick's Day parade a couple of years later, that they had to pay Merrill Lynch for all the parking meters they put a bag over for the day. Lost revenue. So unintended consequences is the point. We have to stop and think. You know, I look at, I can remember like it was yesterday in 1983, Ronald Reagan gave his radio address when he was president, and he said that we in government should learn to look at our country with the eyes of an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs see possibilities where government sees problems, and nothing could be truer.
Thank you, Bob. Representative Ryan, Frank?
Bob, I was going to start with a whole series of real quick questions, but you struck a chord. I ran for office because I firmly believe the Commonwealth is on the verge of insolvency. And I believe that if we do things appropriately, we can keep the Commonwealth, and I'm incredibly optimistic we can turn the ship around. We are 49th out of 50 states for job creation for people who are aged 21 to 35, and I'm not one of those, incidentally, in case you couldn't see. But one of the things that, and now as I go to my questions, do you believe you own the natural gas that's underneath your lands that you've drilled the wells for?
According to the IRS, I do.
Okay, that's what I'm doing. Again, I'm a CPA, so we're good. How much does it cost to cap a well?
If everything goes right, it can be as much as $60,000 or
Right.
more per well.
And we have 61,000 wells in Pennsylvania.
Exactly.
And would you be surprised to find out that we have 300,000 abandoned wells?
No.
Okay, and so when I hear people talk about MS4 regulations, environmental permits, the vast majority of methane escaping and greenhouse gases are coming from those abandoned wells that are actually formerly owned by one of the largest private foundations in the United States that have gotten off scot-free not having to pay it, so we're asking you to pay it. If I were to tell you that I was going to encourage the Commonwealth, I'm not going to do this, by the way, so don't shoot me before I leave. Encourage Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to charge you for trees that are harvested from your property and call that an extraction tax. Do you think most people would consider that to be a fair tax?
No.
Okay, that's what an extraction tax does. Last comment I want to ask you. Do you believe the state that receives your tax dollars spends the money wisely?
Absolutely not.
Okay, yeah, and that's where a lot of us are coming from on this. Is that, you know, I'm like you. When you made your first comment, you said we have a lot to be thankful, and I believe that. My faith commands me that way, and I believe that. But I also believe that the people who are the custodians for the dollars that we're sending them have equally as much responsibility to be good custodians of the dollars we send them, and I'm not seeing it. In my businesses, I own my own private business. I'd have to go lean and Six Sigma to stay competitive in an incredibly competitive environment. I'd love to have the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania do that one day. Thank you very much, Bob. You did a great, both of you did a great job.
Thank you, Representative Ryan. And one last thing I want to touch on real quick, Bob. We're kind of behind the schedule a little bit, but I want to go back to the NYMEX, Henry Hub, and local prices. Now, the severance tax that's part of this bill is going to be based on the NYMEX, which last week when I checked it was about 307 per thousand versus we're at roughly a dollar here. Henry Hub was about $1.75, I think, at the time. We're paying, this bill will actually require the producers to charge a tax based on something that they're not getting. 30% or 40% of what they are actually, or what they're being charged on is what they will actually be getting. And with what your daughter does and my past life, I think we both know that with terrorism as well as infrastructure problems in the Northeast with the NYMEX, what do you see, what's historically been the high for the NYMEX? Has it been 12, I think? Was
Yeah, it's been in double digits, $12 to $14, you know, 6 or 8 years ago. Now it's, you know, it hovers between 2 and 4.
So regardless, if something were to happen, I want this to be a point of clarification for everybody in the Commonwealth. If something were to happen to the infrastructure that would cause a significant impact to the people that are actually buying gas based on the NYMEX, and that price goes through the roof, Pennsylvania taxpayers, regardless of whether or not we're flush with gas and paying a lower rate, the tax will be based on whatever the NYMEX is at the time. So we could be paying 10 to 12 times in taxes what the producers in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are making. That's a very significant impact to the people of the Commonwealth. Bob, Terry, I want to thank you for your testimony. While you guys are getting switched out here, we're going to have Tom and Dan come up, if you would, please. We wanted to start out with what this is going to do with the natural gas industry, with the electric producers, that sort of thing. And now the point of this hearing is going to shift a little bit, and we're going to aim at what the impact will be on our business communities. And Tom, if you want to come up, and Dan, if you would. I'll let, go ahead, Donna.
I'm sorry about that. It's kind of a delay here. I just wanted to make a brief comment about what you already heard and thank both of those gentlemen for your willingness to come and publicly say what you've said. As the majority chair of the Gas and Oil Caucus, I can tell you that we have that battle every single day. And while I'm sitting here listening to you, Bob, say all the good things that we get from the gas and oil, including M&Ms, cosmetics, you know, all these wonderful gadgets, I'm getting emails telling me not to give away in this budget to the gas and oil industry. It's just incredible. So your willingness to share that message and for all of us to share that message is so important that we continue to let people know what this does for Pennsylvania, what this does for our Commonwealth, what this does for our nation, and continue to support that industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with us now we have Tom Zorzi, the CFO for Brookville Equipment, and Dan Vogt?
Yes.
Okay. With Bioptics Incorporated. Tom, I'll start with you, and I'd like to hear what this is going to have an impact on our local businesses. You guys are a major employer here in Brookville, as will be Miller Welding, which will be presenting later, but please.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank all of you for having this. It not only provides an opportunity for the business community to learn and understand what's really going on more in depth than some of the overall generalities that we hear about in the news. Brookville Equipment Company used to be Brookville Locomotive. It was started here in 1918, so we're working on 100 years. We are a manufacturer and remanufacturer of rail products serving passenger freight and mining markets. Our products include locomotives, streetcars, and people movers. We currently employ close to 300 employees in and around Brookville area. And as of now, business is going pretty good. Can't really complain. As a company, as with any company or government entity, we are tasked with revenue constraints with our customers in an increasingly transparent market. You know, the days of just shooting a price out are long gone. You know, things have to be justified. We do a lot of business outside the Commonwealth with a lot of other municipalities in the U.S. and foreign. Just to quote a job is a very complicated process, and there's a lot of hands in the cookie jar, so to speak, along the way. As there are revenue and technical constraints within our competitive marketplace to win a contract, when we do win one, the project evolves, and we, along with everyone else, I believe, in business, have to deal with some of the issues that crop up, you know, as we start through this project and get it to completion. Unfortunately, a lot of the times, you know, our price is locked in up front, and we can't vary from it. So any little hiccup along the way, we either have to absorb or somehow become more efficient and more effective to make up for it. Since we have those constraints on our revenue side, we and like any other business or government entity are forced to look at reducing costs and becoming more efficient to offset the revenue constraints amidst ever increasing costs of employee benefits, healthcare increases, and other operational costs, including the gross receipts and severance taxes that are front and center now. It is my opinion that our government needs to do the same thing and become more efficient and take a deeper dive into how the money is really being spent. Economic growth is not really happening in the state of PA. So the spending programs and related tax policies need to be right-sized for Pennsylvania's existing tax base and structured to generate economic growth. I'm sure that this is not the first time that this has been mentioned, but we need to make Pennsylvania a more tax-friendly state in order to spur economic growth to generate tax revenue rather than just raising tax rates to the residents. Now, how does this affect Brookville Equipment? Did some calculations this morning, actually, and the impact to the company itself is roughly $25,000. That is not a giant crater, but it's still $20,000 or $25,000. In our case, we're not affected so much by natural gas because it's not part of our manufacture. It's not used to manufacture our equipment. We use it to heat. Even that being the case, the natural gas and the transportation portion of this are the two most significant drivers behind that $20,000. So I'm sure that even it not being a significant cost driver for us, some of the other businesses that use it as part of their process, especially steel companies and you know, things like that use a ton of natural gas, you know, the impact to them is going to be enormous. And I think we've heard some examples of that. In preparing for this, I watched another caucus, and it was already, the topic was kind of touched on. The Director of Policy Analysis for the Commonwealth Foundation presented the impact to each one of us and our employees and the citizens of Pennsylvania. Basically, the impact being about $180 for a household of 4 annually. Doing some math on our workforce, that equates to about $37,000 that our employees alone will have to absorb, given a 2.75 head per household calculation. In order for us as an employer to compensate them so they break even to make up that difference would cost our company $50,000, if not more. So if you take those two pieces into consideration, I mean, that's a $70,000 impact so that our employee stays the same as they were a year ago. And that's not a merit raise, that's, it's not a promotion, that's not anything, that's just same, and we have to get that money from somewhere. Also, I guess that $180, we need to keep in mind that estimate comes in at a time where the weather's been favorable the last couple of years, energy costs have been very favorable and low. When those factors change, the $180 a year is going away. It'll be significantly higher than that. Other questions, what happens to the folks on fixed income and assistance? What is the impact to the state for resulting cost increases or for people that can't afford these cost increases? I don't know how that trickles back into the state's budget, if it does at all. It's my feeling that we need to look at other programs such as Medicaid and welfare, which I understand are a large portion, if not the largest, cost driver in the state's budget. Programs like that deserve a significant look before we go to taxpayers and businesses to fund the additional tax increases. I realize the fix is not an easy one. However, we need to improve the big budget programs that have a material impact to Pennsylvania's financial well-being before we add additional tax burden to the businesses and residents. And that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions? Go ahead. Okay. All right. Dan, if you want to proceed, a little bit about your company, and then let us know how this is going to affect you.
Right. My company is Bioptex. We design and manufacture a line of microenvironmental control products used for research, primarily disease-type research. We're located in Butler, PA, and last July 1st, we celebrated 25 years in business. So we made it that far. Now the question is, are we going to continue to make it, given the constraints we have with the laws we need to live within? The point I would like to make today, for anyone in legislation, America, Pennsylvania, the same thing, strength and ability to accomplish anything is directly tied to the support and management of our domestic productive infrastructure. Therefore, before imposing or spending tax dollars, it's important to understand just where our wealth originates. So I have basically broken down our commerce into 3 main areas. One is government-induced commerce. The government does not induce commerce, actually. It is a commerce. It is a commerce of consumption, distribution, and has the ability to borrow and put us deeper in trouble. Then you have domestic commerce. Domestic commerce, consumer good type things like retail sales, service business, healthcare, insurance, repair shops. These are all beneficial and essential services and activities for the country and for the state. Unfortunately, and this is a thing that a lot of people tend to miss, these type of domestic exchanges simply shuffle the money that we already have within the country, within the state, amongst ourselves. If I have my car fixed, money comes out of my pocket to somebody else's pocket. That doesn't make the state more wealthy, and it doesn't make the country stronger. Then we have our productive sector. The productive sector includes agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. These are the areas of activity where we produce products of our own resources, which are then, in turn, most of the time, exported or sold out of the state, out of the country, which means other countries have to give up the wealth that they have, and that wealth comes additively into our treasury so that we have the wealth and the money we need to support ourselves, our necessities, and even take care of the needy. In fact, we, as a country and as a state, we don't need to have just simply wealth. We need to have excess of wealth. We really need to be turning the dollar over and fast because we're consuming it fast. The cost of operation is going up, and unfortunately, after you look at the fact that we're in Western Pennsylvania, everybody here has to know this. America, and especially Western PA, has lost its momentum in the steel industry. No surprise there. Aluminum industry, tool and die industry, auto industry, even electronics industry, pharmaceutical industry. Okay, we're not allowed to mine anymore because it upsets a certain group of people, and agriculture doesn't make money like it used to. We used to be the breadbasket of the world. We're now importing in excess of 17% of our food. So how did these things come about? It comes about, to me, through legislation that has way overburdened our productive sector. Without that productive sector, all the rest of the sectors are having a hard time, as well as the productive sector. Politicians are always talking about, we need more revenue. Well, I agree, you do. Where are you going to get it from? You know, instead of talking about improving our ability to generate wealth, they talk about, let's see another angle we can find to extract more revenue from what's left of our productive sector. And that's just plain wrong. It's led to the condition we're in now. Pennsylvania can't even afford to handle its retirement obligations and its pension obligations. And given the fact that we're continuing to overburden the productive sector in the state, it's only going to get worse. We can't just keep patching it. I can easily go on, but I'm going to let it go at there.
Dan and Tom, thank you both so much. I decided to hold the questions until both of you are done, since I kind of thought it might be similar. If you don't feel uncomfortable saying this, do either of your companies offer defined benefit pension plans to your employees?
We do.
You do, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it
for full times?
For full-time
yeah.
employees, okay. And Dan, Tom, your company does not. And the reason I bring it up is because Pennsylvania is one of the states that still has a defined benefit plan that people are paying into. Does that create a problem for you, Tom, in your case, since you don't, that your employees are questioning how they're going to save for retirement?
Well, we have a defined contribution plan. We don't
I understand.
Yeah, but you know, I think, at least in my most recent business history, you know, having 401k plans, those types of things are pretty much the norm in the public sector now. I have very little experience with companies that have defined benefit plans because they're pretty much going by the wayside.
Yeah, I lecture for the Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs, and you know, most of the clients that we see don't have defined benefit. In the case of the regulatory concerns that you're seeing in terms of the burdens that really aren't part of House Bill 450 or 542 or any of the other tax codes, are you seeing the regulatory process in the Commonwealth either from the tax compliance side, because I'm getting a lot of calls from CPA practitioners that the enhanced collection techniques from the Department of Revenue are getting burdensome, and the environmental regulations, Dan, you mentioned it with the ability to mine or something. Are you seeing those getting more or less complex in the Commonwealth in the past couple of years?
I'm not directly involved, I'm not involved at all in the mining industry,
okay.
But I've heard ripples in as far as I'm active with the NFIB, okay, from other members talking about some of the absolutely ridiculous regulations and hoops they've had to jump through. They were just pointless.
Okay.
My concern is, in that Pennsylvania is already broke, what is so difficult about loosening the reins on our productive sector and let us do what we do best? I mean, American people, the Pennsylvania people, have the ability, the equipment, and the determination to turn this around. We'll dig in, we'll make it happen, but for crying out loud, legislation has to allow us to do that, give us the working room.
No, I agree 100%.
On our end, I guess I'll answer this twofold. We have a lot of Department of Environmental Protection, regulations we have to follow, and it is burdensome. There's a purpose for it, and I agree with the purpose, but I think we're getting a little bit, beyond what is reasonable, and there's a cost associated with that. So the cost of that are going up. I don't know that the benefits are really increasing incrementally with it. As far as the mining industry goes, 5 or 10 years ago, mining was a significant part of our business. We do a lot of people movers and mining locomotives and things like that. And fortunately, the powers that be of Brookville Equipment had enough foresight in seeing what was happening with the mining industry that we were able to expand into other markets, or else we wouldn't be here today.
Fantastic. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Representative Ward, Judy.
Thank you both for being here, and I think your testimony is most interesting from a business perspective. And these two issues may not affect you, but being in the business world, I think you'll be able to address it. What about our state? What about the right to work state that we are not, and programs like prevailing wage? I mean, what effect do you think they have on business here in the Commonwealth?
Well, it doesn't affect my company in that we're in the biotech sector, and I don't know of any biotech unions yet. Who knows what's going to happen? But it's usually something that takes place more at the PhD, master's PhD level kind of activity. But just business in general, I don't see any reason why Pennsylvania shouldn't be a right to work state. I mean, unions have had a stronghold in Pennsylvania for many years, and they've accomplished some of their goals. But now with the legislation and regulations we have now, I'm just not seeing where it's necessary to force people into unionization just to have a job.
Yeah. My thoughts are, if you pay a decent and market rate with your prevailing wage now, there's really no benefit to someone trying to come in and unionize.
Great, thank you so much.
Representative Mao. Did I do that again? Will Tallman, Representative Tallman. That's his brother I was talking about.
Frank's son. But anyways, I know we have a couple of reporters out here, so I'm just going to say this about House Bill 542. There are 54 WAMs, which is walking around money, in House Bill 542, worth approximately $68 million, which we don't need. So you two in the business world, and is a broad-based tax that's in 542. What impact do you see on your business, employment, or whatever? I know you're on the tech side of the equation, and you build locomotives. I'm going to send you my resume, by the way, just to let you know that, Tom. But anyways.
We are not running a high profit ratio, and a lot of businesses don't. I mean, you can go to Standard & Poor's and wherever you want and look up the profit ratios of various businesses, but businesses running a narrow profit ratios can't handle it. I mean, you're going to see more businesses moving out of state. I was very concerned about what's been happening in the business world over the past 8 years. And as a result, I already bought a place down in a very tax-friendly state, one of the big ones too. And ones where they have scorpions. Anyhow, we're able to jump ship and move if we have to, but we're not the only company that's been seriously worried about this type of thing. I mean, you know, Pennsylvania, there's only so many companies that are really doing well in Pennsylvania, and there are here. I mean, but we don't have that critical mass of companies that are doing well to sustain a symbiotic relationship where everybody does well. We have a few doing well, which means we're in trouble.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panel? I want to thank you guys both. You know, it's tough to put yourselves on the line, but the neat thing is I think that with folks like us and businesses like you, as well as the other organizations around the Commonwealth, we have to come to the realization that there has to be some common sense in the way we do government. I'm very grateful that you guys have stepped forward and you've taken the time to draw up your impact or show us what the impact has been or will be with this proposed piece of legislation. Our last testifier is David Miller with Miller Welding and Machine, another major employer here for Brookville. And as far as the manufacturing here in Brookville, both Brookville Equipment and Miller Welding have some of the higher paying jobs for our community, and they're for me this is a very important sector of our economy. And David, if you'd give a little bit of information about your company and what the impacts would be on you.
Am I on here? Yeah. I want to thank you for the Taxpayers Caucus for providing the forum to allow me the opportunity to discuss how the proposed tax changes will impact my company, my employees, and myself. I'm going to be speaking primarily from the perspective of my family's business. For those that don't know me and don't know of our company, Miller Welding and Machine Company was founded in 1963. We've got 2 plants in the Brookville area. We employ approximately 325 to 350 people in Brookville. We also have an operation in Homer City, PA, and we have an additional 50 to 60 people down there. Primarily what we are is a contract manufacturer. We manufacture heavy metal parts that go into a number of industries, mining, construction equipment, material handling, even automotive. And our customers are all multinational corporations. We don't do business just in Pennsylvania. We do business all over the country. A customer I just received an order from on Friday is Sacramento, California. But the company that I'm working for is based out of Europe. All right, so we're dealing with multinational corporations. The processes that we use, we cut, form, shape metal, weld it together, machine it, paint it, and in many situations we assemble modules, if you will, or components that drop into a finished part. And to give you some idea of the scope, we ship anywhere from 10 to 20 tractor trailer loads a day out of Brookville of parts. Now, because we are dealing with, our customers are multinational original equipment manufacturers, and they have very sophisticated purchasing departments. They search the world for suppliers. We have competition from Croatia, Romania, Brazil, Korea, all over the United States as well. So we have people that are traveling all over the world looking at stuff. The contract lengths of the parts that we that we produce, and generally when we win a part, we win it for the life of that product. So as long as we continue to produce good parts, we produce them on time at the quality levels that are necessary, we'll retain that part for the life of that product. That might be 5 years, it might be 6 years, it might be 7. But the price is set now, okay? So, you know, we have to deal with fixed pricing. And as a gentleman from Brookville Equipment talked about, very transparent. Our customers know what our costs are going into it. And the only area that we see a little bit of movement is oftentimes we have a steel or metals index where our price will adjust up and down as the market goes up and down. And that's it. Other than that, we're fixed, okay? But it's even worse than that because our customers demand year-over-year price reductions. 3% year-over-year, all right? Now, if your price is fixed, but they're telling you you've got to cut the price every year, how do you do that? You know, we don't have an option. We have to do it because if we don't, that guy in Brazil will do the job next year, you know. So we do it by continuous improvement activities, constantly looking at better productivity, automation, all kinds of techniques to do that, just to carve out enough space to be able to continue with that project. And bear in mind, we've got to keep paying additional wages, we've got to keep paying higher health care, we've got to keep paying all these other increases as well. The other issue that we have is the competition that we do face. They start out at a distinct advantage. They don't have the regulations and the taxes that I have to face, all right? So, I mean, it would be one thing if we were facing fair competition and you passed a tax and all of my competition had to pay it too. They don't. They don't have to pay it, you know. Will they pay it? Maybe, maybe not. In the first 6 months of this year, we had a product family that we have been producing parts for 20 years, I'd say maybe 25 years, moved to Mexico. That part now is being sourced in Mexico. That particular product family amounted to as much as $20 million a year in sales to me. You know, so I mean, it goes. It comes and goes. What's the direct monetary impact of these taxes? I can tell you that of the gross receipt taxes that we pay today, we currently pay probably in the area of $61,000 in the telecommunications, electrical, and natural gas gross receipts. And I know that natural gas is zero right now. We use, and I've annualized our current consumption, but we use approximately $900,000 worth of electricity in a year and $300,000 worth of natural gas. Those paint lines that I talked about and the painted parts, we have large ovens. We have a 6-inch gas line coming into our building. You can imagine how much gas goes through a 6-inch gas line. The increase that we're looking at here is about $24,000 a year. So that means that those gross receipt taxes go from $60,000 to $84,000, $85,000. That's a 39% increase, all right? And I didn't factor any of that cost in any of the projects that I'm working on. You know, that's the problem. I might be able to start adding it to new projects as they come up. And as I said, will our customers pay it? Maybe. But they have a vote, and they can vote with their feet. They don't have to do business in Pennsylvania. You know, That's an issue. There's a sales cycle in our industry as well that makes this even tougher. I mentioned about the project that I heard about on Friday from Sacramento, California. We've been working on that project for 3 years to get it to this point. In the next 18 months, we will do some pre-production and prototyping of those parts, and production is not actually slated to begin until 2019 and run through 2023. This is how long it takes us to get projects landed, to do the types of things that we do. The indirect impacts and so forth, as far as the direct impact, I want to tell you that we talked a little bit about, and I heard a little bit of mention about tight margins and so forth. Our company has been blessed in many ways. We have good years and some not so good. But all in all, we've done well over the last 53 years or 54 years. Last year, we eked out a profit of 0.8 cents per dollar. All right, 0.8. Now, to somehow come up with $24,000 in new money without taking it away from somebody else, I'm going to have to come up with another $2.4 million in sales. All right? And when might I get that? Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years from now? I mean, that's an issue. Now, hopefully this year, and it does appear, I'll say that we're having a better year this year, and probably our profit will be significantly, higher. And by significant, I mean maybe it'll be 2 or 3%. So we'll hope so. But that's the kind of stuff that we have to deal with. These are the decisions that we then have to make and have to deal with. How do I do that? How do I, who do I not pay? Or who do I, what benefits do we have to look at and say, folks, it's been good while it lasted, but we just can't afford that anymore. And when do you folks do that? And I don't mean you, individually, but that's the issue that we have. Some of the indirect impacts that we're going to see is a lot of the equipment that our customers make, and that means sales to me, are used in the exploration and production of energy. So whenever you put a severance tax on some of these minerals and so forth, what you're doing is you're reducing the likelihood that people will invest in that, which also means that there's less need for that equipment that I would be producing. You made a less competitive position for me because, cheap energy is one of the strategic advantages this region has. I don't know why anybody thinks it's a good idea to diminish or perhaps destroy the one strong card we have going for us. Tighter margins, my margins are already tight. I mean, and people, they hear the numbers, they hear the sales dollars of 80 million, 100 million, they think we're rolling in dough. And there's a lot of money goes back out. And it's not what everybody, perhaps thinks. And now the margins are going to have to be tighter still. I'm either going to increase the cost to cover these, increase the price to cover these costs and lose more contracts, or I'm going to have to accept that instead of 0.8 cents, I might make 0.6. That's what's going to happen. Future projects can be factored, but like I said, the customer does have a vote. There's going to be less opportunity to raise wages or pension benefits for our employees. Our people are going to need to squeeze out some productivity improvements. in addition to what's already demanded by our, and contractually demanded by our customers, just to be able to pay the additional tax. And they're not going to get any of the fruits of that labor. It's going to go away. The state's going to get it. I know that some people think that $24,000 is a small amount, and I would say that, you know, with a, you know, 80 or 100 million in sales, 24,000 does seem small. But the state has budgets in the billions. 24,000 is a whole lot smaller to them than it is to me, you know. So we're faced with tough choices. Sometimes we have to hold the line or even retreat on benefits, on profit sharing and health insurance. This year, we had to make a change in our health insurance plan to maintain the same choices that we had with the plan last year to this year. The increase took the entire profit that we made this year. Just wiped it out. So we had to go back and look at maintaining as good a coverage as we could, and the only way that we were able to do that was to limit the choices of our employees. That's what we have to do when you don't have the money. You maybe have to retreat, you know, and maybe you have to deal with something else. You know, we do have lean activities, Six Sigma activities and so forth going on daily. And I know that I'm not quite sure what's going on the government side, but you know, it's kind of a little bit frustrating to have to go through what we have to go through. And you know, it's just dictated. You know, you make the tough choices. You cut the benefits and wages or whatever for your employees because we don't want to have to ours. And you know, that's kind of where we're sitting. That's the impact that it's going to have on me. And now, you know, I'm not getting into personal stuff, but I mean, to the companies that we run, this is what we deal with on a daily basis. So.
Just a couple of comments. I can answer your question about the lean operations at the state, and the answer is we're not. And we, that's my background is Lean Six Sigma, and I was ISO certified in the manufacturing companies I was in. I estimate in the government side, under the governor's jurisdiction, that we could drop our cost by about 15% of state spending without impacting any programs whatsoever. And I do this for a living. I've written a book about it. If you can't sleep at night, I'll get you a copy.
Right.
Are you ISO certified?
Yes, we are.
How long have you been ISO certified?
We've been ISO certified ISO 9000 since I think 2006 maybe, and we also are ISO 14000.
Yeah, and so you've got your systems process controls,
Yes.
and you've pulled out the lean operations. You made sure the process variations are minimized, and that's how you're wringing out costs, right?
Oh yeah.
And you need that in order to be able to remain competitive and to be able to sell to some of the people you're selling to. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Sir, have you ever had to participate in a reverse auction?
Yes.
And in a reverse auction, you bear the brunt of anything that goes wrong. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah.
And the reason I bring it up is because government doesn't experience that. We're throwing these taxes on you like it doesn't matter, and yet you're dealing in a world where it does matter, and it's 0.8% is a big deal. The last question I have for you is, are you having difficulty finding staff, be it welders, machinists, or other manufacturing folks to help you in your job to remain competitive and to stay in business?
Absolutely.
How old is, and I hate to ask you this question, if you don't want to answer it, I get it. What's the average age of your workforce on the machinist side?
The average age, I don't know the exact number. Okay, I can tell you this, that we have probably 60 or 70 people that within the next 5 years will be retiring. Okay.
Does that cause you concern?
Yes, it does, very much.
Yeah.
I know that most of the people that we have that have been with us, like I happen to have gone to Jeff Tech, which is a trade school here for drafting design whenever I was in high school. I was actually one of the first people to walk through the door in that building. And when I graduated from there, some of the people that were in that school with me graduated and came to work for our firm at that time. Those gentlemen are now our managers and our senior leaders, and they're about ready to retire, okay? And I don't really have the workforce, and as much as we've tried to develop, and we've done training and all kinds of programs and so forth, we're having a difficult time finding people that will stay engaged, okay?
Sir, thank you. And one last comment, you know, as I'm a freshman, as you say, the folks that are sitting to my left, I have to tell you, unbelievably competent. It's renewed my faith in government. I came out of the private sector. I'm a retired Marine. And from every person that's sitting here, I can tell you, you've got some unbelievably capable people that are sitting to my left that really care about this Commonwealth. And there's a whole group of other folks that have been working on this Taxpayers Caucus that trying to fix this. And Chris, I can tell you, this is probably the best hearing I think I've been to since I've been in Harrisburg. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for the compliment, Frank. Also, I know you're not on the Labor and Industry Committee, but earlier this week we've been beating this drum over the $400 million in wasted spending on the computerization improvement for the unemployment compensation. Just got a report from the Department of Labor earlier this week that they actually sent several of their team to lean certification training, and they're starting to have those discussions. It's far too late. I mean, it's been far too long overdue, but it's a drum that I've been beating for the last 2.5 years in the Labor Committee, and it's finally starting to take. And I sent them a nice note back saying I appreciate them at least doing that. Dave, what is the likelihood, if this tax were to be imposed on you in the next several months, what's the likelihood, given the lead time that you have in getting new customers, that $2.4 million you're going to have to come up with? What do you anticipate would be the lead time for you even to come close to picking up that kind of an increase in sales?
Well, our sales cycle generally, we figure it's close to 1 to 2 years to develop new business, and by that what I mean is sustaining business. Most of the people that we do business with, the parts, as I said, are large. They're heavily engineered, and by the time we quote a job and they assess the figures, and as I said, they search the world for competitors, to deal with us. We get awarded the job. We'll probably have 16 weeks to 20 weeks in building the initial, order, and then we ship it, and the customer has to have time to evaluate it. The customer has to have time to maybe put it through their paces. So maybe another 20 or 30 weeks go by before they come back for a second round of production. At that point, it goes from a prototype stage to what we call a pre-production stage, where maybe we'll make 3 or 4 instead of just 1. And again, that'll take another 20 weeks, to do. And then another 20 weeks for them to evaluate it and put it through their testing and their issues before it comes back to become a sustaining everyday job. Prior to that, it's just kind of, we're kind of testing the waters, and that's that way whether it's a brand new customer or whether it's a new product with an existing customer. It doesn't much matter. It has to go through that process. I'd like to accelerate it as much as I can, and we'd like to do it, but we're not in control of the whole process all the way along the line. Some of it is customer driven, and that's just we have to go by their timelines. you
And
know.
in the whole process, you're going to end up having to eat the losses while the,
Right. Yeah.
well, I thank you, and I thank all of the testifiers. I'd like to invite any comments. We'll start here. Representative Tolman.
Just appreciate what you did, Chris.
Representative Ward.
I would also like to echo my thanks to all of you. It's been very enlightening about what this would mean to your particular businesses. So thank you very much for your honesty.
I'll also echo those thank yous. It really was very good to hear all of you speak from your own perspective and your what happens in your business and how it would impact you. So thank you for that, and thank you for the invitation to be here, Representative Dush. Appreciate it very much.
All I can say is thank you all very, very much, and Chris, thanks for the invitation.
Well, thank you. My closing remarks, I just want to say, you know, it's been touched on here. Unfortunately, Harrisburg and DC have not been looking more than about 10 or 15 minutes down the road, I like to say, or it could even be seconds. There's an old essay that was I, pencil, the autobiography of the pencil as told by Leonard Reed. You guys have touched on a little bit of the thesis of that, in that when this essay was done in the 1950s at the height of the communist push, it was done to demonstrate that there's not a single person in the world that understood everything that was necessary to create even something as ubiquitous as a pencil. And unfortunately, Harrisburg and DC have a lot of people who think that they know how to everything that's involved with this stuff, and we don't. Frederic Bastiat, he was a contemporary of Alexis de Tocqueville. He made the comment in his book, The Law, that all government is force. We're either applying force or the threat of force to compel people to do something or not to do something. And in the case of these taxes, we're putting a gun to the heads of the people, the industries of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're forcing them to give up their wealth, their resources, with what I believe we haven't had adequate oversight. As has been brought up here, we do not have a Lean Six Sigma program through, for all intents and purposes, the entire state government. It's well overdue. I thank every one of the testifiers. I thank again the members who have traveled from around the state to attend. There would have been more members here, but we had some information that we will be back possibly in session next week. And the members of the Taxpayers Caucus who are looking for the means to pay for this without the tax increases, and I think folks will be happy with what they hear next week coming out of this group of people. I believe we found a way to do that. And again, thank you for everybody who attended, and thank you for the to the Heritage House for allowing us to host this event here. And with that, good day, everybody.
Thank you.